Hello, I'm Spirit Halloween's generic dead rocker costume, and today we're going to talk about love and sex in gaming. Love and sex in gaming is one of those perennial subjects that always comes around on the wheel of irrelevance, as the OG GM would put it. Go and subscribe to him. It goes back a long way. It goes back to What's New with Phil and Dixie, or even Palace of the Silver Princess, with all its hints of Korean influence and sadomasochism, written of course by a woman, subsequently censored by men, unfortunately. So, the topic has a lot of history in games. There seems to be a desire to include these elements, but also a bashfulness about it, and a concern about coming across as creepy or whatever, or not wanting to imagine a sexual situation when someone is cross-playing their gender, or we're nerds, we're not exactly the most attractive people in the world by and large as a whole, right? Weirdly, it was to a great extent the influx of women in the days of Vampire the Masquerade that brought sexuality and romance more to the fore in a lot of gaming. It's a weird one, and it goes back a long way, and we still haven't arrived at any sort of level of comfort or resolution about the topic. Now, I am of course fairly uniquely well placed to talk about this subject. I play explicit RPGs with people who work in porn, combining adult performance with adult RP and regular RP over on Tabletopless, which was on last night. Tabletopless.org, criticalhole.com. More recently, much more recently, we have had Ursine on vampire action in Baldur's Gate 3. We have had commercialized hypersexuality in Cyberpunk 2077, and a spate of sexual-themed supplements such as kinks and cantrips or thirsty sword lesbians for tabletop games. But a lot of it has been this translation to other media. So D&D sexuality appearing in Baldur's Gate 3 is more present, more visible, more common than it is in your actual games around your table. Same with the sexuality in Cyberpunk. But we do have these supplements and things which are being sold, are successfully crowdfunding, to my mild irritation. So clearly there is a thirst for thirsty sword lesbians, kinks and cantrips, dames of Astoria, all of these kind of things, and sexy miniatures as well. Now, the sexual content is a lot more common in the computer games, but when you think about it, that kind of makes a bit more sense. Computer games are a more solitary activity, and not everyone is an exhibitionist, and you only need one hand to operate a mouse, which may be something else to do with it. But I think it's that privacy, relatively speaking, that allows people to indulge their sexual side when it comes to role-playing. It's why things like slash fiction and pornified fan fiction are so popular. That is a solitary activity in writing it, typically, and it is a solitary activity in consuming it as well. Now, the recent, relatively speaking, success of sexual content in games is a source of frustration for me, and I'm sure for other pioneers of sexuality in the gaming space. I wrote several books: The Quintessential Temptress, Nymphology, Blue Magic, the D20 version of Matcha Women with Guns. I've been running Erotech and putting material out for that for years. I've done erotic card games. I got the license for gore and made Tales of Gore. Much of this has had the cover, the protection of being presented through a lens of humour, and that still happens a great deal in things like Dames of Astoria, Kinks and Cantrips. Going back, the Book of Erotic Fantasy had some tongue-in-cheek elements. It's like we're afraid to tackle it seriously, though I tried to through the commercial necessity of hiding it behind humour. It gives us that cover. It lets us, nudge and wink, say no more. But since then, it does seem to have opened out slightly. The success of these crowdfunded books, while personally frustrating, is probably good for tackling these subjects in gaming as a whole. If you can't buy sexy miniatures because of uproar and furore, you can at least 3D print them at home, and there are boutique games that are much more overtly sexual, like Kingdom Death. So you can view this as being a kind of maturing or immaturing hobby in a way. After all, role-playing has been around 50 years at this point. So you would think at least some people who were playing it had grown up through their adolescence into adulthood, and thus have at least some interest in sex. It's also a source of enormous frustration to me that I know I've expressed here before, that games and gaming culture are so completely and relatively unquestioningly accepting of even the most graphic violence. Critical hit tables that get gratuitous, people enjoying describing the horrors that their characters inflict upon goblins or whatever, and I'm completely fine with that. But it just seems there's this weird dichotomy between how accepting we are of violence and how unaccepting we are of sexuality. There is another aspect, and this is going to be controversial to some, so please hear me out. The recent and relatively sudden acceptance of sexual content, sexual themed content and games does to a large extent appear to be limited to queer sexuality, unconventional sexuality. And this is a double standard that occurs, because there is still quite a lot of heavy criticism that gets aimed at more conventional heterosexual sexuality or male dom kink sexuality. Perhaps it's because queer sex, queer attraction is placed on a pedestal as somehow being beyond criticism, and anyone who does criticize it can be dismissed as a chud or a homophobe or whatever, even if that's not the basis of their complaint. Now, I'm not saying I don't want there to be queer sexuality in games, but this is another weird dichotomy, that we can be so relatively accepting of queer sexuality, even kinky queer sexuality, but not be as accepting in our games of heterosexual sexuality, or more conventionally aligned kink even. It all seems a little bit unfair, but I want to argue to you that sex and romance have a place in your games. Now, I'm not saying that means you have to engage in a detailed blow-by-blow, for want of a better phrase, account of every sex move that a character engages in around the table with each other or with NPCs. I don't really even do that on Tabletopless, where people actually have sex on camera and play around, right? And where we try and weave it into the narrative. Rather, we tend to set the scene up and then fade to black, or fade to the action, as the case might be. You know, playing out sex scenes is fine if you're all comfy with it, but it's probably best conducted in private or written as that fanfic for your own enjoyment or whatever else. Some people will be fine with it, a lot of people aren't. It is, after all, a rather intimate thing. For the most part, in tabletop gaming, you know, playing out sex, it's like riding a moped or fucking a fat girl. It's fine, so long as nobody sees you. The sweet spot, to me, seems to be playing out that lead up and then fading to black at the appropriate moment. That seems to be the safest, clearest way to go about it. And you know, I'm not an advocate for safety tools, but some sort of discussion or feeling comfortable enough to give feedback is probably a good idea when it comes to including sexuality. But some people are really hung up, and that's a whole lot of no fun. For me, the inclusion of sex, romance, and sexuality in a game is much more about the world building and the implications that aspects of the game world have when it comes to sex, romance, sexuality, marriage, children, all of those kind of things. The inclusion of these themes as motivations, background flavour, a way of conveying the setting and aspects of it effectively, and ignoring these elements of sexuality, romance, and so on is awkward and can be as hobbling to the world building as leaving out combat from the rules can be. You know, in the real world, we have naked monks and nuns in the margins of calligraphic holy tomes. We have temples full of painstakingly carved orgies in India. We have 24/7 hardcore streaming pornography in 4K on any screen we care to put it on, and a music industry that is largely obsessed with getting dicks wet. We have disquieting fan fiction about our childhood favourite books. We have carefully programmed sex scenes in computer games. We have whole genres based around romance and the pursuit of sex, usually in the form of some horny Japanese teenager. We have cutting-edge AI technology that is being used to create imaginary revenge porn, or to generate a waifu at the click of a button to our own exacting specifications. It's just not kosher to have a game world, that ignores all of this stuff, especially when so much classical mythology, especially pantheistic mythology, involves sex, temptation, jealousy, illegitimate offspring, all of that. Does this or that culture in your game world operate on monogamy or polygamy or polygyny? Are they group marriages, as were common in a lot of Heinlein's science fiction? Is this a game you're going to be playing on a generational basis, where bloodline and inheritance are important, where marriages are political and important? Games like Pendragon or Birthright or Reign. Is it a world of repression and control, like Puritan England or the late Victorian era? Or is it a more openly licentious world, like the Regency era? Even in the first, is there an active underground of prostitution and kink and sexuality because the overculture is so dominant and repressive? How does magic and technology interface with sexuality in this world of yours? Is it one where advertising and culture as a whole screams constant pornified sexuality from every available surface, like in Cyberpunk? Is it one where people exchange AI sex models for virtual coupling while they're travelling between the stars, like in Fred Pohl's Day Million? How is magic used to enhance or creep, and how do you deal with a world in which love spells and potions are real and twist people up into knots. Find your own level, as the flat earthers would say. Find your own equilibrium. You know, as I said, I'm not an advocate for safety tools, but this is one area, sadly, where I think you do have to set expectations and feel out each other's comfort levels, or be explicit about each other's comfort levels if you're going to do this successfully. But you don't have to play it out. But your world will definitely benefit from considering how sex, sexuality, romance, all of that fits in the whole. Zang. I'm now porn adjacent. I run a tabletop game stream regularly with some porn stars, which you can check out with suitable precautions in place at tabletopless.org. And just know that I put as much effort into this campaign as I would any other tits or no tits.
Turn up the bass, turn up the treble. Texas rockabilly rebel. Turn up the bass, turn up the treble. Texas rockabilly rebel.